Mr. Chairman, you are all set and live.
All right, well, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the first meeting of this term of the Community Planning and Economic Development Committee to order. Today's Tuesday, December 7th. For the record, let the record reflect that all three committee members are present, myself, Mr. Winograd, and Mr. Dzanowicz. We're also joined by Ms. Billing-Smith, and Mayor Cantor is on the telephone. So we'll start with the first item of business, which is the new park transit-oriented district discussion. Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Good evening, everyone. Good to see you online. So this is a very important agenda item that the council and the committee have been working on for some time, for several years now. The town and the town council have been working to promote transit-oriented development along the New Park Avenue corridor. As part of that work, over the past year and a half, we have been engaged in a planning initiative to take a critical look at our zoning ordinances that are in place to see to what extent they might need to be modified to better promote transit-oriented development in that area. And this has been an initiative where we're seeking lots of community engagement. You know, we've done a lot of that already. We do have a draft of an ordinance that we're very excited to share with the committee tonight. Once you are comfortable with it, we do want to take the ordinance back out to the community and, you know, conduct more engagement with key stakeholders such as our business associations and other resident groups. We have 3 documents we'd like to work through this evening. As part of this effort for our new council members, the council did put a moratorium in effect, a moratorium that impacts just certain new uses within certain areas, certain geographic areas along the corridor. We would like to extend the moratorium for an additional period of time to give us more time to complete this effort. We have a community engagement report we'd like to share with the committee as well. And then last but certainly not least, what I touched on at the beginning is we do have a proposed ordinance that we'd like to share with you and receive your feedback on. As I said earlier, you know, the community engagement component of this effort has been very, very important. I'd like to thank all of our residents, business associations, and other groups that have participated in the review thus far, and we're certainly going to be looking for more of their input and involvement moving forward. I'll pause there, Mr. Chairman, and would ask that you recognize our town planner, Mr. Dumais, and he can walk you through the 3 documents.
Thank you, Mr. Hart, for the overview on the transit-oriented district status and the documents that we'll go over tonight with the committee. Mr. Dumais.
Thank you, Councilor Davidoff. Just to provide a little bit more background, Councilor Dzanowicz, it's nice to meet you. I don't know how familiar you are with the past efforts that the community has undertaken with respect to transit-oriented development. But really, they began back in 2016 with a number of studies that the town participated with, both with CROG, the City of Hartford, and DOT to look at the fast track stations and transit-oriented development. In 2016 and 2017, the town received a grant and completed what we call the New Park Avenue Transit Area Complete Streets Study, which looked at physical improvements, infrastructure improvements to New Park Avenue, principally geared towards making connections between the fast track stations more bike and pedestrian friendly, and also to enhance the streetscape. Subsequent to that, we were successful at securing several $1 million of grants to actually implement that study. So to do the complete streets improvements, that design work is now underway. It comes with its own community engagement. And then fast forward to most recently in 2020, we adopted our plan of conservation and development, which TOD was an emphasis and focus throughout that document that suggested finally taking a look, building upon our past work and efforts, and implementing some changes to our zoning around to support TOD. Briefly, transit-oriented development is just really relatively high-density mixed-use development located within a short walking distance, 5 to 10-minute walk. Those are the numbers usually here. So that's about a quarter mile to half mile from any fixed node transit station. Really good transit-oriented development is going to be pedestrian-oriented. It's going to be relatively compact development, and it should contain a mix of all different types of uses. And have moderate to high densities, minimum of 12 to 15 units per acre is typically what you see in the TOD literature as supportive of transit-oriented development. Also, we're trying to create senses of place with TOD zones, create actual neighborhoods and transit communities. And then also typical characteristics include low parking requirements when we talk about transit-oriented development. So fast forward, just by way of background, I'm going to attempt to share a screen, Mr. Chairman. Bear with me. I just get a thumbs up that everyone can see that screen.
Yep.
Thank you. So this is just really an orientation map of the area of town we're talking about. So I will use the highlight marker here to try to better emphasize the area. Down here in the bottom that I just circled in blue, that's our Elmwood Fast Track Station. Up here, that is Fast Track Station as Flatbush. Here's the City of Hartford line. Up at the top of the map is Flatbush. At the bottom is New Britain Avenue. And then along the spine parallel to the Fast Track Station is New Park Avenue. So what you see in this map, I know it's a little bit busy, but it includes some key information. Any of the areas in yellow are essentially a quarter mile or a 5-minute walk from one of those fast track stations. And those are 5 minutes of actual walking, not as measured. So it's a more accurate walk shed from the fast track stations. You can see the Trout Brook linear multi-use trail in orange in the middle of the map here. And then in red, that's the area of our New Park Avenue Complete Streets project. So just wanted to put that on the map just to orient everyone to the area of town we're talking to. So as Mr. Hart indicated, we started a focus process to discuss transit-oriented development with the council and the community as a result of the council's passage of the moratorium extending moratorium on certain uses not supportive of transit-oriented development. That was passed last November, and it was extended in September. And that moratorium, the purpose of that was to allow for time to conduct study work and community engagement and solicit input from West Hartford towns, boards and commissions, neighborhood and business associations, and property and business owners to finalize appropriate land use regulations more supportive of transit-oriented development. And the key to the moratorium was the prohibition on the establishment of any uses within that area of those maps we just looked at, of any uses that were deemed to be not supportive of transit-oriented development. And in generally, there were 11 uses listed, and they were land intensive or vehicle intensive uses that are on the surface, or as the regulations are currently written, difficult to make work in a mixed use environment or that are supportive of transit. So that's the first part of tonight's discussion. Is there's a suggestion and a request to move forward ordinance that would extend that moratorium through March 31st of this coming year. And the purpose of that would be for us to continue the community outreach introduce the ordinance after receiving feedback from the community and the council, ultimately, hopefully, with ultimate adoption. Pause there to see if there's any questions about the moratorium. Seeing none, I will move on. The next thing I want to briefly talk about is the outreach that we did today, to date. So as Mr. Hart indicated, we did do a robust community engagement process that went back to late last spring and early summer. Our process included a community-wide survey about characteristics of preferences. We did a visual preference survey for development types and patterns within the corridor. That went out to the entire community, and we got close to 800 responses about preferred desired outcomes, what people thought of the new Park Avenue corridor generally, and what they thought it could accommodate in terms of future growth or development. In addition, we conducted focus groups with our business associations. So we did a meeting with the two business associations to engage business owners with their desires for future change in the corridor. And then we did a general community-wide meeting that was held again in that same time frame. What we heard from the community overall was that there was a preference to treat both station areas the same. So Flatbush and Elmwood stations were not perceived by the community or the business community to be any different, and whatever solution we come up with, it should be one solution for both station areas. We heard from the business community and the community at large that it was really important to support and retain existing businesses within the corridor, and the zoning ordinances should continue to allow a diverse mix of land uses, but really perhaps strengthen building and site design controls. The community at large was very supportive of transit-oriented design principles, including locating parking areas behind the rear of buildings, placing the buildings or new buildings closer to the streets, and then enhancing opportunities for green and public space. Other things we heard from the community where there was support to moderately increase density, and that included increasing building heights up to 5 stories. And there was a general consensus by the respondents from our process that the auto-oriented development that currently characterizes much of the corridor was not dense enough really to support the station areas. So from that, we applied that, and we went back to a prior iteration of CPED, and we presented those findings late in the summer and asked at that time for some feedback on different tools and techniques we should consider when drafting the ordinance. And a couple of the things of interest, we wanted to confirm that moderate increases in density, both residential density, building height should be looked at, as well as increases in FAR and reductions in parking standards. That was kind of a broad across the board direction or interest that we heard from the then CPED to at least take a look at. At the time, I asked if we should consider some bonus or incentive standards to facilitate certain policy objectives that could be supportive of transit-oriented development, and I was told yes. So the ordinance I want to walk everyone through this evening tries to incorporate the feedback we've heard to date, and also the feedback for successful TOD ordinances in other communities. Bring up the screen.
Mr. Winograd. We can't hear you.
In the new software, Civic, whatever, I noticed, did those get uploaded or not? I was able to find the survey. The other two wouldn't download. Are they there or?
They're there.
That's weird. Okay. The technical difficulties on my end then.
Councilor Winograd, I'll share it on the screen right now. I don't know if that's particularly helpful.
Yeah, that is, but I'm not sure why I'm not able to open it. Right.
Okay, so this is not designed to be an ordinance in our standard zoning ordinance format. It's designed for discussion purposes, to solicit your feedback on critical components and go back out and engage the community. So the purpose of the ordinance is fairly straightforward. This transit-oriented district is intended to guide development in a predictable, contextual, design-focused manner within walking distance of fixed nodes of public transit. It's also intended to support the principles of transit-oriented development and to foster the creation of complete neighborhoods, including to preserve and expand opportunities for businesses and employers that serve West Hartford residents in the surrounding region, to encourage a mix of retail, restaurant, office, entertainment, and residential uses, to promote moderate to high population and employment densities that support transit, encourage infill development, rehabilitation, redevelopment, and adaptive reuse, and to promote a consistent pedestrian-oriented building and site design. The way this ordinance is structured, it's envisioned to be a zone change for properties that qualify in the corridor. Contrast that with a similarly intended ordinance, the traditional neighborhood design district. If you'll recall, that ordinance in particular is an ordinance that applies to much of the Elmwood, the center of Elmwood, also overlaps with the Elmwood station area. But that's an overlay zone, meaning that it's a floating zone that's only triggered with certain development thresholds apply, then that zone gets landed. So that zone has not widely been implemented or utilized. And one of the reasons behind that is that trigger mechanism and the fact that it's not a landed zone, it overlays the area. So the suggested approach here would be to actually rezone the properties within a quarter mile of our two two fast track stations to this new transit-oriented district. So that's what the applicability section says here. Development standards. So the next, sorry, the font got a little bit smaller. The next section of the ordinance would actually end up being incorporated into a table in one of our schedule of permitted uses if we pursue this approach. But I wanted to break it out here for discussion purposes. First, I would highlight residential density. So there's a suggestion here to increase residential density to about 750 square feet per dwelling unit. So that's land area per dwelling unit. Comparing that to other areas of town, currently our BC or our other dense residential multifamily zones, the densest we have is about 1,000 square feet of land area per dwelling unit. So this would be a moderate increase in that number. And that translates into about 56 units an acre. So it goes up from 43 to 56. So there's a moderate increase in permitted residential density. Floor area ratio, there's a suggested approach here of an increase in FAR from up to 1.5 as of right, with additional bonuses in the FAR standards based on certain criteria that we'll discuss in a moment. So again, if we look at the central business district, so that's Elmwood Center or West Hartford Center, that's at about 125 today. There's some bonus provisions for those areas as well, but this would be a moderate increase to try to incentivize transit-oriented development. Building height, again, this would be an as of right 5 stories, 55 feet. With a step back required above the 4th floor. So what that means is that you would go 4 stories up, and then the 5th story would have to step back from the edge of the 4th story facade or cornice line to help reduce the perceived mass of any structure from a pedestrian experience along a public right-of-way. Building coverages, those would be 50% as of right. So that's in line with our more dense central business districts. So 50%, another increase in permitted coverage. And then yards and screening. So the yards would be reduced similarly, that there would be no required side yard. And the purpose of that is to encourage properties to build to the lot lines in instances where they don't have to provide vehicular access to the rear. That helps to create a consistent pedestrian street wall and streetscape environment that makes for a more pleasant pedestrian experience. The front yard setbacks would be the building line as modified below. and that's about building placement. So there's a series of special development standards that suggesting we consider that would be akin to focusing on form-based issues. And Councilor Davidoff, you should remember a little bit of this because it's the approach we took when we were looking at coming up with a standard to control the form for drive-throughs and drive-through facilities. So here I think the critical objectives are to ensure new buildings are placed within a reasonable distance of the building line. And the building line is essentially our front yard setback in West Hartford. It varies a bit street to street. So this standard would suggest that any new buildings be constructed not less than 15 feet behind the building line, the established building line. So again, trying to put the mass of the building up onto the streets to occupy the street and activate the frontage. We want the buildings to occupy a good percentage, in this case 60% of the lots on which they front on, again, to provide for a pedestrian experience, active uses that activate the street. And then we want buildings to relate to and be oriented towards the street. Other building design elements proposed in this ordinance would be to ensure that the main entrance of the building or structure actually faces the street and it's articulated through the use of architectural detailing. So we want people to walk off of the street into the buildings. You can have secondary entrances off the rear or parking areas, that's okay, but the main entrance should be off the front of the building. Ground floor building fenestration. So fenestration is essentially the amount of windows or glazing or doors on a facade of a building. So this is important for creating active uses and not having blank walls. So in this instance, we're suggesting non-residential uses have a minimum of 40% of fenestration along a street-facing facade. Residential uses, a minimum of 25% along the street-facing facade. That's at the ground floor level, and in any upper story fenestration is 15% per story. We're suggesting there should be an architecturally distinct horizontal facade division between the ground floor and the upper stories of any building. Service or loading areas, utility connections, those should be located to the back of the building along with any refuse or receptacles. And then the ground floor should have habitable or active floor space within the first 20 feet of the building depth of the frontage. Similarly, in this ordinance for properties that apply, we're suggesting that any lot should have not more than one curb cut to a public right-of-way or street for each 500 feet of frontage. The more numerous the curb cuts, and this is the case for much of the corridor today, that interrupts both the streetscape and a pleasant pedestrian or bicycle experience accessing or traveling through the corridor. Parking, on-site parking, it should be located to the side or the rear of the buildings. And if it's on the side or the rear, it should be behind the front facade of the building. I'm suggesting reducing the dimensional standards of a parking stall down to 9 by 18. Elsewhere in town, our standard is 9 by 20. Tandem or stacked parking should be permitted for residential uses. So a tandem parking space would be as if you had a residential unit, you could park two cars that are assigned to the same dwelling unit, one behind the other. So you can create a more efficient parking deck or parking lot without creating unneeded paved areas. So it's just a more efficient use of space. Parking requirements. So across the board, I'm suggesting we consider reductions to the minimum parking requirements. So for any multifamily units, a suggested approach would be a reduction down to one space per dwelling unit. I wrote that wrong there, I apologize, but it's one parking space per dwelling unit. Right now, our standard in West Hartford is 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit. So this would be a fairly significant reduction. Retail, personal service, banks, other uses of that nature. Again, this would be a reduction of 3 spaces. We suggested a 3 spaces per 1,000 square feet of floor area. That's about a reduction nearly over in half of our current standard. We're closer to 7 spaces per 1,000 elsewhere in town for that standard. Similarly, office space, suggesting a reduction in the required amount of parking per square foot of gross floor area. And then also for restaurants, since we calculate those on a per seat basis, again, suggesting a reduction. We have 1 per 3 seats elsewhere in town. I'm suggesting 1 per 4 seats. And then also, as part of this option, I'm suggesting we should consider introducing a new standard, and that's an allowance for mixed-use parking requirements. And this table might not ultimately exist in the final form of an ordinance, but I think the critical thing would be to allow for property owners or developers to use a mixed-use parking calculation, and there's methodology that's clearly set forward and widely adopted transportation planning and transportation engineering in the Urban Land Institute's shared parking methodology. And what that tries to attempt to do is, based on different use mixes within a property or a site, it allows sharing of spaces at different times of the day, because we know that different uses have different peak demands. Again, this is trying to right-size parking and not overbuild a parking supply when it's not needed. So trying to create a maximum amount of efficiency throughout the day, rather than building to one peak period and having large areas of parking that are unused most of the time. Lastly, with parking, off-street parking, to the extent that it exists within the corridor, should be able to be counted towards your on-street demand, and that's what this section here states. There's a suggestion to introduce a new standard for minimum bicycle parking requirements. We don't currently have a standard in our zoning ordinances, and this is a logical place to start in our transit-oriented district. So here's a new standard of 1 bicycle parking rack per dwelling, 1 space per 5 dwelling units, with a non-residential standard based on square footages of floor areas. So 1 space per 3,000 square feet of gross floor area, up to a maximum of 10 parking spaces, and then same for office, and a similar standard for restaurants. And this next section talks about a carve out. So this provides a relief valve, or a suggested relief valve, if there is a specific reason that any property or developer could not comply with any of the special development standards we just discussed. They could, by way of application to our Planning and Zoning Commission, apply for a special use permit in consultation with going to our Design Review Advisory Committee and getting a report and recommendation from them that states the reason why that they need to request an approval from the departure of the underlying standards. So this is intended to be a relief valve for the special design standards. And then lastly, what I'll talk about next are some bonus standards. And this is a little bit different from the one other bonus standard we have in town, which we developed about 5 years ago now, that applies to our central business district. So this is the same concept in that bonus densities could be granted for applicants who meet certain design-focused transit supportive objectives pertaining to access management, affordable housing, trail connections, and sustainability. And this first thing we're looking at is a chart. So we'll talk about what qualifies for points and then what those points mean. And essentially they mean that someone, anyone, a property owner or business owner or developer, could achieve additional floor area ratio, additional building coverage, and additional reductions in parking requirements. So the first eligible class or category for a bonus standard would be access or curb cut management. This is something that's particularly difficult to compel property owners or adjacent property owners to work together on, but it has a significant benefit to traffic safety, pedestrian safety, and the overall streetscape environment, the elimination of curb cuts. So if you eliminate curb cuts or create interconnections, so more of a shared management, shared access between existing parking lots, you'd be eligible for a point as indicated here. And then we just define what those standards would be for lot interconnections. Creation of affordable housing units. So again, suggesting that if we want to incentivize the creation of affordable housing units, that should be worth some bonus amenity points. And the scale here is the more units provided, the more points offered, or the deeper the affordability levels of those units are, the higher the point levels. So that's the purpose of this bonus provision. Next, we see a Trout Brook Trail connection provision. So this might not apply to everyone, every property within the corridor, but for those properties that could take advantage of our Trout Brook Trail, we thought it might be a good idea to incentivize the provisions for bicycle or pedestrian connections between the property and the Trout Brook Trail itself, ideally with some kind of public access agreement to widen access and utilization of the trail. And then lastly, set of bonus standards around sustainability. We thought that there should be some value, and we heard from the community, to enhancing either energy efficiency, renewable energy, or on-site stormwater management. So different strategies listed in this chart are worth different points that it could ultimately be rolled back into bonus standards for increased development density. With that, I will pause, and that kind of concludes my walkthrough of the ordinance as currently contemplated.
Thank you, Mr. Dumais. I have a few questions, and at the beginning of the presentation, you talked about the TND overlay, and we've seen historically what the purpose and intent was of that overlay to begin with. But as one looks at the effects that it's had on the district, I think it's fair to say that it's hampered development in the district, and it really hasn't come to fruition as to what the original intent was to make it happen. We really haven't seen a lot of that happening in the district. So I'm wondering, as we're doing this, two questions: whether or not we have the legal ability to make a change in the TND overlay, because I think there was something, if I recall, that had to do with a lawsuit settlement when that was implemented, and two, how it can interrelate with this transit-oriented district ordinance. So that's my first question. So I don't know who answers that. Would that be Mr. Dumais or Mr. Hart? Or...
Councilor David, I can answer that. I'm just trying to pull up a map for us to look at. If you a moment. I'm going to pull up my screen here so we can look at that area. It's a great question. So here is an official zoning map. It's a little bit difficult to see, but this green hatched overlay, everyone can see that. My mouse through, yes, no. There's a green diagonal hatching. That's the TND. So it applies to Elmwood Center. It's essentially centered as an overlay zone on the intersection of South Quaker and New Britain Avenue. What I've tried to just highlight in blue, or I can see that blue, 34 acres or so, that's the area of potential overlap with the transit-oriented district. So there is some overlap. And we do have the authority, the zoning authority, to amend the zoning map in that district. In this instance, I would suggest removing the TND from those areas and applying the TOD standards. If successful, if the TOD is a successful tool, a logical next step would be to go back and have a similar dialogue with the Elmwood community by and large, and we probably have that opportunity coming up in the future, given two fairly significant projects that are likely to come down the road. One, kind of the disposition and the restructuring of the former St. Bridget School, and then also what happens with the current Elmwood Community Center. That could be a logical dialogue at that time to revisit the T&D and see what improvements can be made. Is it needed? Are there other ways to incentivize a more consistent and predictable design-oriented outcome?
Thank you. I appreciate that. So perhaps we should look at the removal of that blue area zone change, because I think that would be helpful, and it wouldn't be a hindrance to what we're trying to accomplish with the transit-oriented district here. I do like the different options under the density bonus system. I think we accomplish a lot of what we're trying to accomplish here with bicycles, the trail, the reduction of curb cuts, the increased floor area, the higher, more dense uses. Did we give any consideration to EV charging stations? I understand we're trying to look at less transit oriented things, but a big portion of the build back better infrastructure, whatever we want to call it, is the creation of over 500,000 charging stations nationwide. And if that's going to be a prevalent or mode of transportation, electric vehicles, I think we can't just ignore that. I think we have to do something about that. And I also read an article today that electric bicycles are being incentivized to be purchased, and there's a lot of favorable tax proposals coming out to make them much more affordable. So I don't know if they would park in the same thing as a traditional bike rack, but if not, then I think we should probably know that that's something that currently exists, and we should be cognizant of that. And then while I'm still thinking of the major things that are coming out of this infrastructure bill, I think broadband and Wi-Fi access somehow probably should be somewhere in this, especially in the residential component. I think that's important in terms of what would be in the district, because if people could work more successfully at home, that's another workplace, even though they're not going to an office. So those were the things I had with respect to the bonus. And the last thing is, it's my understanding that CROG is also looking at a transit-oriented ordinance in the very near future. So is there a way that we can find where they are and what the synergies may be, so that we're in sync with them, so that when developments come in and we make a referral to CROG, I think it would be beneficial if we line up with what they have, so that we don't get a referral back saying, no, you're in conflict with what we're trying to do in the area. So those are my overall considerations. I think this ordinance in its draft form, obviously there's a little bit more to do and to get more input, but I think we're about, I'd say 90% of where we need to be with this ordinance. So I appreciate all the hard work that's gone into this. And I don't think since we've had the moratorium in place, it's been detrimental to the development in the district. I think it shows that we have given pause and have taken the time to reflect on what we see as key components to growing this. And with that said, I think the last thing is, and this is still part of that infrastructure bill, and it's sort of not just West Hartford, but to get that train station that would go to New Haven, or maybe one day go to Boston. That would be so key, and that would be transformative for this entire district. And it just would just change things drastically in terms of who lives there, who works there, how people get to the transit station. It would be, in my opinion, an economic development accelerator at a pace that we probably have never seen before. So I think we're moving in the right direction for this whole thing, and I'm glad that we took our time to get to where we were here. So thank you, and those are my comments. I don't know if others have questions or comments. Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Just to briefly comment on some of your remarks, and thank you for your suggestions. First of all, CROG is engaged in an initiative as well, and they've established a project committee, and Mr. Dumais will be West Hartford's representative on that working group. So that will provide us really with the best opportunity to coordinate closely with them. Your suggestion with respect to charging stations for both cars and bikes, I do recall as part of the use of rescue plan funds, we do have a proposed project, I believe it's 300 to 400,000 to build out that infrastructure across town. We can look more specifically what would be included in this area. Broadband, I do think the corridor is well served, but we'll coordinate. I think the challenge is not so much the fiber in the street, but maybe access and affordability for some of the customers in that area. And then rail, yes, we're very, very interested. The Connecticut DOT has a project on the books for some period of time. I think they've designed roughly 1/3 of our station, if I recall correctly, Mr. Martin. And we've been through CROG encouraging the state to provide the balance of the funding needed to complete that design. But those are just some brief comments in response to your remarks, and we'll look at all of those issues and be prepared to respond at your next meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Is there further, Mr. Winograd?
Thank you. And issue of broadband is of deep interest to me right now because my computer is giving me a heck of a time tonight. Sorry for the trip through the house. I'm trying to figure out if a different spot in the house will get me better coverage. First of all, I just want to say I think the draft is really impressive. There's a lot in there. I'm thrilled by the work, and I just want to, give my congratulations to everybody who worked on that. I think it's draft forms. We can find things we'd want to add, but it's really a great start. And I'm really impressed by it. Two questions I have on it. One, just in terms of the point totals, I don't know whether those were, sort of how well thought out in terms of like comparing one thing to another, in terms of what values a point. I think I noticed, getting 20% affordable housing, as one point, but also, cutting a little trail into the path. It just seems like those may not be equivalent costs or benefits to the community. So I'm just maybe how we apportion the point total might need some adjusting. We don't want to give points for something kind of too easy at some, at a certain level. The other thing, just a question: if when we do a rezoning, what impact? Obviously, you have non-compliant properties are grandfathered in. But what happens? Like, what is the threshold for improvements to their property that would then sort of kick in the new zoning? is it a amount if they spend, or you wouldn't want somebody after they're putting in a roof and suddenly saying, well, you're out of compliance. So how much? But they also couldn't do a tear down and replace what they've had. So how does that work when we do that sort of a drastic change?
That's a great question, Counselor Winograd. So if we were to do a straight rezone of the district and the properties that would be in the district, any new improvements would need to comply with the new standards. So the point you raise is a really good one. I started to address that through providing a relief valve in the ordinance by going, if you can't address, but there also needs to be some kind of provision, once we had kind of an approach looked at, I will work closely with Corp Counsel. We need to create a separate standard that allows any existing non-conforming properties to continue, which they would have that authority and right anyway under our normal zoning. But I would like to find a way to allow them to build either through physical additions or improvements, as long as they're building towards conformity, to allow that to occur. Because we realize that not everyone is going to knock down a building and build to this standard. But if someone's incrementally building towards what the intent of this ordinance is, I think that should be allowed. So we need to probably create a vehicle to do that, so that people aren't just locked in if they are non-conforming and grandfathered, but allow them to grow and change towards conformity.
Great, thank you. So yeah, we'll have to put that out without some thought about that. Will cause some panic, I think, among the business owners, particularly in that area. So I'm glad to hear that's doable.
Thank you, Mr. Winograd, for your good comments this evening. Is there anyone else who has any questions or comments at this point? Seeing none, I think then we'll just leave it there, and I believe it will be on the agenda for Tuesday to extend the moratorium to the March date. Is that correct, Mr. Hart?
Matt Hart, Town Manager. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, that is correct. The moratorium, the extension, will be on the agenda for Tuesday night for the Town Council. With respect to the draft ordinance itself, we'd like to take that back out to the community for additional conversation. The two business associations, our pedestrian bicycle group, as well as CROG, the City of Hartford. I believe there are other organized groups and associations as well as the community at large. So we'd like to do that over the next month or so. We understand we're entering more holidays, and we'll be mindful of that, but we want to be prepared to bring additional feedback to you at your meeting next month.
That sounds like a good plan of action. So, and I think if you could let the committee know when the presentations to the business associations are, that would be helpful as well. Is there anything further? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Dumais, for your excellent work this evening. We do have a hard stop at a little before 8 o'clock. So with that said, we'll try to go through the staff reports in a condensed manner, since we're about 7:20 and we've got 4 of them, almost 5 staff reports to consider. So we'll start first with community development, and I believe that would be Mr. Martin. Good evening, sir.
Thank you, Councilor Davidoff and others. Dwayne Martin, Acting Director of Community Development and Town Engineer. Yes, I'll go through quickly. I'm going to consolidate and do the Building Division, Engineering Division, and Planning Division. And then, of course, Todd Dumais is here to answer any questions that you may have regarding the Planning Division. So I'll start with the Building Division and just highlighting some of the activities. Just let me know if you have any questions, and I'll do each of these one at a time to allow a pause. I just wanted to point out that we are addressing some of the issues related to the Building Division and the high activity level that we've been seeing. Despite the pandemic, the numbers for building permits and inspections and other activities is still at a very, very high level. And we have hired a new building inspector. His name is Daniel Luce. He was working part-time for the division. He's now full-time. So that helps out with some of the inspections and plan reviews. We also have a part-time staff person acting as a staff assistant to enter the permit applications to assist on the front end of those. So we are implementing measures to address the high level of activity in the Building Division. And we also have a City View upgrade coming up, and you'll hear more about that at an upcoming meeting. But we have training for the building and planning division staff for the City View upgrade. And that is scheduled for the middle of this month. And we have other activities planned related to that going into January. So we're hoping at the beginning of the year, going towards the end of winter, that we have a City View upgrade launched, which will help facilitate a lot of the activities, especially related to the building division. The only other thing that I wanted to mention regarding the building division is that we have resolved a lingering issue with respect to the sump pump permit applications. If you're not familiar, the MDC has a backwater valve program where they'll assist residents that qualify with the installation of a backwater valve to stop groundwater from flowing into the sanitary sewer system. They'll also install a sump pump to gather that water and discharge it on the exterior of the home. There was some disagreement with regards to a note that was put on the town's sump pump permit applications. And so our corporation counsel office and their counterparts at the MDC have worked out an arrangement with regards to the information that's put onto our sump pump permit applications pertaining to drainage nuisances. And the MDC has information in their backwater valve program to notify residents on a similar regard. So we've gotten through this impasse, which lasted about a month and a half. And we are now accepting and issuing, reviewing, and moving forward with these sump pump permit applications. We're also notifying residents and anybody that was interested and was getting this this notification that we weren't doing the sump pump permits or allowing them to go forward. That's not the case anymore. Pause for questions there.
Mr. Winograd.
Thank you. And just on that real quickly, is MDC now back to providing a contractor of 4 people? I know at the moment, at the issue, they were not doing that and telling people to kind of get their own plumber or contractor, but they're back in business now?
Yes. Sorry, through you, Councilor Deva. Yes, the answer is yes. We've confirmed the NDC, including a contractor who had somewhere around 50 to 100 permit applications submitted. We've heard back that they are going to go ahead. So that contractor, and I believe they have a couple others that are available. I don't know if they're still allowing residents to pick another contractor and seek reimbursement. That could still be a consideration. That I haven't heard, but the contractors they have in place, they are going forward.
Good, thank you.
Mr. Martin, I do have a question on inspections. Where do we currently stand with respect to turnaround time for inspections?
Turnaround time for inspections. I thought we were still around 3 weeks for the inspection turnaround, but I'd have to confirm that because it's been fluctuating for various reasons in the office. But I can get you a more accurate answer on that.
And as a follow-up and sort of related question, with several new applications coming in of a larger scale for projects being built in town, do we anticipate that we would need increased personnel to manage plan review, inspection, things of that nature, to keep those projects on a timely schedule? Because all those things, in my opinion, are related to grand list growth. So just curious about that.
Sure, understood. I think the answer is no. And the reason I say that is because of the City View upgrade. Our staff in the building division spends a lot of time managing and handling the processing of these applications. And so a lot of that responsibility is going to fall back on the applicant and not on the building division staff to go back and forth with the applicant. So that'll allow or free up time with the building division staff, not only the front end staff, but also the inspectors to be able to handle more work. So I believe the answer is yes. It really will depend on when those applications come in, those larger applications, with respect to the timing of our City View upgrade, which I'm anticipating late winter, it should be launched. So as of right now, I don't know that we have any of those larger ones yet. I think we're getting close with a few of them, but I guess the timing will tell. But we are going to track. This is something that Mr. Hart and I have discussed going forward, tracking the building division's activities with performance measures so that we have better assessment and can answer that question in greater detail moving forward.
Thank you for your answer. I appreciate it. Are there any further questions about the building department and or its operations? Seeing none, Mr. Martin, are you going to then talk about engineering?
Yes, sir. Engineering is next. Thank you. So similar to the building division, we have a new staff person that joined us in the engineering division. This person is a civil engineer too and is filling the void that was left from a retirement. And his name is Jason McCabe. Civil engineer 2 is the title. He has a wealth of knowledge with respect to drainage. So very good because we have plenty of drainage work upcoming. So we're back to full staff, at least on the design front in the engineering division. Just to highlight a few of the engineering projects, and again, I'll pause at the end for any questions. You're probably well aware, but I figure I would mention that we have our Trout Trail Phase 5 section under construction. That's the part between Farmington Ave and Fern Street. The contractor is planning on paving the base course of the trail, but we won't be able to finish and open it up to the public until the spring. But they're doing what they can to get as much done before we have a hard cold snap or winter hits officially, if you will. So that is anticipated to be completed in the spring. That's section Phase 5, as I just mentioned. Phase 6, which continues from there, so it goes from Fern Street to Duffield Street, is planned to go into construction in the spring. We're just waiting for the commitment to fund for that grant from the DOT. So we anticipate getting that soon and being able to go out to bid, and that will start construction in the spring. So that's again Phase 6 of the Trout Brook Trail from Fern Street to Duffield Street. Quick mention about our North Main Street road diet. We have a survey out and it's been heavily responded. We're approaching 2,000 respondents for that survey. The vast majority is favorable, and we continue with the trial, and our consultant is preparing later on this winter to issue recommendations to the town council. So more information to come on that. But so far, it's been well received. We've had some negative comments or concerns, and for the most part, we've been able to address those. But generally speaking, I would say the road diet has been functioning very well. Similar area North Main Street Bridge project is approximately 90 to 95% complete. Contractor is going to be installing some guide rail this or next week and a little bit of landscaping. They will have to return also in the spring to finish the project, but most of it's very minor in nature. So for all intents and purposes, that project is close to completion. A couple other projects to mention: the Brayburn Road culvert rehabilitation. After quite a long duration, the town and the contractor have executed a contract amendment. This was a long-standing issue and a dispute between the two parties, and we have met with the contractor at the site. They plan on having a crew come out either this Thursday or Friday. There was a tree that came down, if you haven't seen the site, and it damaged some of the material in the watercourse area. So the contractor is going to come out. They're going to clean up the site. They're going to remove the tree. They have ordered the materials, and we're waiting to get a schedule for the delivery of those materials and a schedule to complete that project. I would anticipate it would be complete in the summer of 2022. So more to come on that project. And lastly, for the engineering division, I just wanted to mention that the semi-diverters on the boulevard intersections of 4 Mile, Newport at Sedgwick are complete. And the contractor is working on the semi-diverter on Newport at Ellsworth with plans of finishing that before winter sets in. We have temporary semi-diverters that we are trying at the intersection of Boulevard and Riggs, and we continue to do traffic measurements, speed measurements, and evaluating the crashes that occur in the area. So far as the safety metric goes, it's been a big success. The crashes at those intersections has pretty much gone away, but it does cause some issues with the neighborhood, and we're working with those concerns and complaints regarding navigating through that area. And I'll pause there for the engineering division report.
I do have one question, and this was brought up to me by a resident. There seems to be a number of very severe traffic accidents on South Main Street before you get to the highway. It seems like that one telephone pole has been struck numerous times, and having one that drives by there maybe 4 or 5 times a week. I don't really understand how these people could hit this, but it just seems to get hit, and there's seems to be severe damage to automobiles and persons. So I don't know if there's other things that we can do to lessen the risk there. I don't know. I'm not a traffic person, but when something is in the news almost on a 3-week basis, there's another crash there. There's something not right, whether it be the lighting or not enough I don't know, preventive notice or ways to notify somebody that the road curves a little there or something, or the speed or whatever. But it just seems to be one place where a number of accidents continue to occur.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. We are familiar with that, we being the engineering division. I don't know of any issue, but I can look into it with my staff in the police department. We have done some measures in that area. I agree with you. It's a fairly slight curve, but for some reason it's a repeat crash location. And I think we've even had cars that have flipped on occasion there. We have implemented obviously pavement markings. We've done rumble strips, which are the grooves in the pavement to try and alert a motorist that may have fallen asleep or just gone off track. Maybe they're distracted. There's also reflectors and signage on the poles and near the poles. I believe the street lighting's fine, but we can review the area again and discuss it with the police. Sometimes there isn't an engineering solution, especially if they're impaired or distracted. It's hard to stop those crashes from occurring, but we can certainly review that. That's not an issue at all.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Is there anything further with regard to the engineering report? Thank you. Mr. Winograd.
Sorry, just a real quick comment. Is I did a double take when I rode by the 4 Mile Road additions, and they look fantastic. They were very impressive going by. I hadn't been able to picture it before, but again, great job with that. It just looked wonderful.
Thank you, Mr. Winograd. Is there anything further with respect to engineering items? Okay. We will move on to our economic development report. And sorry, Mr. Martin.
Sorry, I just wanted, and I apologize, Kristen. I just wanted to mention one thing regarding the planning division. You do have future agenda items listed on there, so we can talk about that when appropriate. But I also wanted to mention that the planning division is working on a stormwater low impact development zoning standards. So that was not listed, but it's something that there was a meeting that occurred and it went well, and it's an initiative that we're going to continue to explore with the planning division taking the lead. So if anybody has questions on that, Todd can answer that. Thank you. I promise that's it.
All right. Well, I'm certain no one has any questions because we're waiting to hear from Ms. Gorski with respect to economic development. Ms. Gorski.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Davidoff. Good evening to the committee. Kristen Gorski, Economic Development Coordinator. So since we had some limitations on time, I was asked to pull together a brief verbal report versus my typical PowerPoint report. So I will run through some highlights in town. I will just note that these are significant projects as well as some new and some longtime active projects. It does not represent all of the activity that we see in town. I will also note that we still continue to be incredibly busy, and a lot of really great businesses are coming in and developments are in the planning phase right now. So a lot of excellent activity that we should be really excited about. So 2 new medical office tenants that will be joining us in Bishop's Corner in the Simon Conover building at 342 North Main Street, Greater Hartford Family Medical and Canona's Medical Group. Together, they're taking approximately 8,000 square feet of space. So they are working on wrapping up their build out and should open hopefully in early January. Going into the center, Pink Flamingo, they opened at 1001 Farmington Avenue about a week ago. And so they are a retailer. This is their first brick and mortar. They sell a lot of party supplies and do a lot of balloon designs on social media. They're excited to join the community. A couple of restaurant updates in the center. El Santo, which is a new restaurant by the owners of Frida and Elmwood. They are currently underway with build out of the Cozy space on Farmington Avenue, a longtime vacant space, about 2.5 years vacant. Also, Sparrow is wrapping up their build out, a very long time build out, but they're looking to open in early 2022. So that will be a restaurant that will be going into the former Grant space on Farmington Avenue. Also, the Russell, they're wrapping up their build out and they hope to be able to schedule some final inspections in order to get open in early 2022. So they are moving into 39 South Main Street. So this is their third location. They have 2 in Hartford, first in West Hartford. So excited to welcome them to the community. I believe many people may have seen this, but a good announcement that came last week, Rosa Mexicano, which is a chain. They started out of New York City. They are fine Mexican food style cuisine, and they are fine dining. They are moving into the former Bar Louie space in Blueback Square. So that's a pretty significant storefront space that we're excited to activate. And that's a really big lease for Blueback. Also at 15 Sedgwick, Best Cleaners, they had celebrated a grand opening and ribbon cutting about 2 weeks ago with the West Hartford Chamber. So they've been looking for a space in West Hartford for close to a decade, and they're excited to join us at 15 Sedgwick. So that's a former Victoria Cleaner space. Directly next door, Homegrown Studios. They're currently located at the Boulevard Shops, right on Boulevard and Prospect. They're moving into a larger space at 13 Sedgwick. And they will also be expanding their business and basically offering art classes in their studio for all ages versus where they're more focused on youth right now. So very excited for that expansion for them. Moving further down on Park Road at the Prospect Plaza, Floor and Decor. Many people should be aware of this. The council had approved some special development district amendments a couple of months ago. We have gotten word that the lease there is fully executed. So Floor and Decor is a retailer of different types of flooring. And so they are taking that significant former ShopRite space that's about 80,000 square feet. And so they actually started to apply for their building permits. So that's when we look at our overall vacancy rate and what we have, that's a really significant lease for us to be able to fill so much square footage there. Moving over onto New Park Avenue, AutoZone, they are well underway. That's another significant square footage space for us to be able to fill. So there's about 30,000 square feet of space that they're currently building out at 510 New Park. So they're anticipating hopefully being up and running in that location in spring of 2022. And then lastly, Storage Solutions, they are open on New Britain Avenue. So they are open predominantly in the larger building, in the larger Bally's building, and they're just doing some minor final items on some of the standalone buildings that are located over on South Street, but significant investment there. And they opened a couple of weeks ago, and then 3 additional business items, excuse me, before I move on to just a couple of development items, and then happy to take any questions. 3 active build outs that are occurring in Corbin's Corner. So excited that the Shake Shack building in the Saratage development, that is finally fully leased. Hot Table, who is building out right next to Shake Shack. They sell paninis. They're a franchise that is located predominantly in Western Massachusetts, expanding into our market. They hope to get up and running early 2022, so they're wrapping things up there. Tavern in the Square, West Hartford will be their first Connecticut location. They are a sit-down restaurant, a smaller chain out of the greater Boston area. They're hoping to get up and running in that location in spring of 2022. And then the last lease that was signed, which is also well underway with build out, is Ivy Rehab. So it is a physical therapy and rehabilitation business that is expanding in Hartford County. They have several locations throughout Connecticut, but really honing in on Hartford County in order to do an expansion. They hope to also be open in that location in spring of 2022. So a couple of additional updates. Construction and construction fences kind of everywhere you turn. So a lot of really great activity. I will note that, you know, we have several multifamily developments underway. So 540 New Park, as well as the residences at Berkshire Road. Those are two active construction sites that are really working to be able to get the exterior of their buildings weather tight for winter, which they are on track to do. And then over the course of the winter, they're going to be focusing on the interior and building out the interior of both of those sites. Interesting about residences at Berkshire Road, all of the foundations are in, and it kind of looks as though things are on hold, but what they're doing is they're bringing in a panel system. So literally the walls and everything will come in, and then we'll see a lot of very quick activity once all of that is put into place. I will also note two additional items. Hartford Healthcare, they're kind of in the same place, but a little bit further ahead. So they have their building that is weather tight. As you see, pretty much the entire exterior has been complete at this point in time. So they are working on the interior of that building. So they hope to take the winter and complete some of that build out. And you'll also see some minor landscaping improvements and some site improvements there over the course of the winter. But that building and that site are coming together very quickly. They are hoping to do a completion of that building and turning over that site probably late spring of 2022 at this point in time. And then lastly, I think that the town manager may have mentioned this to the council, but a new special development district application that we received last week, an exciting project, 920 to 924 Farmington Avenue. This is a new item that will be received by the council at your meeting, next Tuesday. So this will be a 48 unit mixed use development. And so this will be, the application is submitted by Farmington Avenue Acquisitions, LLC. What they're aiming to do is to demolish the two buildings that are currently on site. Those are the two buildings that are closest to Trout Brook on Farmington Avenue, and they'll do new construction of 48 units, 41 bedrooms, 8 2-bedrooms, and then they're going to have ground floor, which they're aiming to attract either office or retail. They've been very clear and upfront that they are not looking to have a food use there, but given the market, they're really, priorities are office and potentially some supplemental retail. So that's a really great project that's coming down the pike, and just look to receive that application next week. So those are all of the updates that I have. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Gorski, for your very upbeat tone of the message that you delivered. I have several questions. First, the parking lot that's at the Doral Marketplace Comcast property, do we have any update as to when that would be functional? Hopefully the sooner the better. It just seems to be a place where it's very popular and not adequate parking.
Yes, thank you, Councilor Davidoff. I would defer to Todd Dumais on that item.
Thanks, Ms. Gorski. Councilor Davidoff, so that parking lot construction, it's my understanding based on their site contractor manager that Physical improvements should be done this month, but the final completion of all of the work is unfortunately going to not occur until spring. Most of the remaining work is around landscaping and other site improvements, and there's some fencing. So the compliance with the special development district that was approved that allowed that lot won't happen until the spring, mostly for plant material, but they hope to have it operational to at least park some vehicles there within the coming month.
That would be very good news. And then my next question centers around some residents have noted that there are some establishments in the center that are operating as nightclubs or entertainment district establishments without a permit, an entertainment license. And I think it was brought to my attention by some younger people over the Thanksgiving holiday. Some of the places were quite active with respect to the number of people there and things of that nature. Have you heard anything with respect to that activity?
Thank you, Councilor Davidoff. So I will ask for Town Manager Hart to give some additional comments if he can. But what I will note is that we work very actively with the police department. So as you may know, the police department oversees the entertainment license process, and the entertainment ordinance is under the police department. So we work collaboratively together to ensure that any restaurant or establishment really that is interested in having live or amplified music, that they do have a current entertainment license. So we have had some conversations dating back to as recent as about a month and a half ago to, kind of go through the restaurants specifically that we do have in the center and other areas of town to ensure that they do have current and active licenses. So as I understand it, everyone should at this point in time. Town Manager Hart, do you have any additional comments?
Mr. Hart.
Matt Hart, Town Manager. Thank you, Ms. Gorski. Ms. Gorski, I think, covered it well. Just this past fall, she and members of the PD, reviewed all of the outstanding entertainment licenses and related permits. That's something we're seeking to do on at least an annual basis.
Much appreciated. Thank you very much for the proactive. So I think that what has been occurring there has happened for a long period of time. So we'll probably need some type of strategy to address this going forward, so that people understand what the expectation is of the community. Oh, never mind. We'll just leave it at that, and we'll discuss this at a different point offline. And then with respect to other economic development concerns, with respect to like vacancy rates, more particularly commercial office space, I'm curious as to whether or not we have a number for that.
Thank you, Councilor Davidoff. So I would be happy to produce a report through CoStar. So it's a real estate platform that we have been fortunate enough to have, and I've had access to for the last year and some change. So I'd be happy to produce some reports. So what those are submarket reports, we can do them specifically for West Hartford and send those to the committee. But in terms, I try to pull them monthly. So in terms of the last report that I had pulled, and I will note that they change almost daily, but the last report that I had pulled, and these are kind of ballpark, surprisingly for office, we're somewhere in the 7.5% range. Our retail is hovering just above 9%. Industrial is low 4%. And then our multifamily is really at an all-time low. We've been hovering, at least for the last 6 to 8 months, somewhere around 3%. So again, those are ballpark estimates, but I'm happy to pull some CoStar reports and give the committee exacts as soon as tomorrow. Excuse me.
No, we don't need it that quickly, but if we could get that and shared with the committee as well as with the rest of the council, that would be helpful. So thank you for your very positive report. Is there any further questions for Ms. Gorski? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Dumais, do you have anything to report from the planning department?
Councilor Davidoff, I think Mr. Martin covered the items for my department.
Okay, thank you. And that leads us to the last report, that which would be the town manager with respect to staff reports.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt Hart, Town Manager. I can wrap up in just a couple of minutes. First of all, I'd like to thank the committee members as well as your predecessors for funding these important planning studies, as well as allowing us to add additional staff in the building department and elsewhere in order to keep up with the workload. And hopefully you can see the fruition of your good work there. I'd like to thank the members of our staff team for their good reports this evening. I'd like to commend Mr. Dumais in particular for his work on the transit district ordinance, and really for taking a good hard look at best practices within our region and around the country, and trying to produce a document that would work extremely well for the town of West Hartford. We recently had a couple of very successful holiday events, Fire and Ice and Holiday Stroll in particular, and those certainly help to generate enthusiasm as well as economic activity here in our town. I don't believe Ms. Gorski mentioned this. The Ideanomics, and I didn't ask her to. The Ideanomics property, I know we're following the disposition of that very closely. We remain in close contact with the seller's real estate agent, and we are optimistic still that the property will close by the end of the calendar year. And we'll let the council know as soon as we hear a more definitive date. Again, our hope is, and what we're hearing is that it will happen this calendar year. If not, we'll look for something early in 2022. And the buyer's name has not been announced publicly as of yet, but at the closing, it certainly will be. And then I'd like to touch on our future agenda items, if I could wrap up there. Starting off with the outdoor dining ordinance amendment earlier this year, the council asked us to prepare an amendment to facilitate outdoor dining, to build on what we've had in place for many years now, as well as what we've had in place the last couple of summers. Some of our restaurants, particularly in the center, have reported their best summers ever the last 2 years, and that is attributable to outdoor dining. It's been enormously successful, and we know you want to continue to do what we can to make it more successful in the future. So we'll have an ordinance to that effect at an upcoming meeting. We'll present one. The next item, cannabis zoning. Also earlier this year, the town council asked us to look at that issue, both with respect to a potential dispensary use as well as recreational cannabis. So we are working on a draft ordinance there as well that we'll be presenting to the town council, or to this committee, to this committee at an upcoming meeting. And then lastly, due to some state legislation passed at the end of the last term of the General Assembly, Public Act 21-29, there are a few changes and updates we need to make to our zoning ordinances with respect to residential parking standards, as well as accessory dwelling units. The council recently significantly upgraded our ADU ordinance within the past year, but the state law does contain some changes, and we'll have to make sure that our ordinance reflects those changes. So we just want to highlight those future agenda items for you as well. That completes my quick report, Mr. Chairman. I know we're almost out of time, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions for the manager? Okay, seeing none, I just want to thank everybody for their participation, their hard work this evening. a reminder that the committee will then, in the near future, meet the third Wednesday of the month at 8 a.m. It will be the goal to have the meeting last no longer than an hour, if possible, so that we can get to work doing our day jobs, the ones that pay us our income. So if we could accomplish that, that would be great. And if anyone has any other agenda items that they would like to see on the agenda, either contact myself or the manager to get them placed on the agenda. So with that all said, I'd like to wish everybody a very happy and healthy holiday season. And may the spirit of the season just bring you good health and good fortune. And with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Zanowitz. So moved.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Winograd. Second, Mr. Zanowitz.
Seconded.
Second.
Get a second or we can't leave.
Second.
Mr. Zanowitz.
Yes, second.
Thank you. To all have a good night. Thank you very much.